Picture this. You're 6 months pregnant, broke, and your abusive ex-husband is stalking you through the freezing streets of Chicago. In pure desperation, you grab the first stranger you see and beg him to pretend he knows you. That stranger turns out to be Marcus Sterling, one of America's youngest billionaires. But this isn't your typical Cinderella story. Because when Sarah Mitchell's rescue goes viral, her ex-husband Derek launches a vicious campaign to destroy her reputation and claim her unborn child. He spreads lies that paint her as a gold-digging manipulator. He drugs her food to make her compliant. He even breaks into her home and records her most private moments. What Sarah doesn't know is that Derek has powerful allies, including a federal judge willing to rig the system in his favor. And when the final courtroom showdown arrives, Marcus Sterling will have to make an impossible choice: his $3 billion empire or the woman he's fallen in love with. This is the story of a woman who refused to stay a victim, a man who learned that some things are worth more than money, and a battle that exposed the dark truth about how far some people will go to control those they claim to love. But I'm warning you now, this story will take you to places you don't expect. Because sometimes the greatest victories require the greatest sacrifices. And sometimes love means walking away from everything you've ever known. Stay with me for the next hour, and I'll show you what happens when ordinary people face extraordinary choices, and why this story has already inspired millions of women around the world to fight back against their own demons. The wind whipped through Chicago's Magnificent Mile with the fury of a woman scorned, and Sarah Mitchell knew exactly how that felt. She pulled her thin coat tighter around her 6-month pregnant belly as snow stung her face like tiny accusations. The eviction notice crinkled in her pocket with every step, a paper demon reminding her that in 72 hours she would have nowhere to go. Sarah had once been a corporate lawyer with a corner office and a future that gleamed like the city's skyline. Now she was a waitress at Jimmy's Diner, carrying trays and swallowing pride with equal measure. The fall from grace had been swift and merciless, orchestrated by her ex-husband Derek with the precision of a military campaign. The luxury hotels of the Magnificent Mile stood like monuments to everything she had lost. Each gleaming facade reminded her of the life she had thrown away when she chose truth over comfort, integrity over security. The whistleblowing case that had cost her everything seemed like a lifetime ago, though it had been only 18 months. Her phone buzzed with another text from Derek. "You can't run forever, Sarah. Come home where you belong." Home. The word tasted bitter. Derek's idea of home was a cage gilded with false promises and emotional manipulation. She had escaped that prison once, and she would sleep on the streets before returning. But as another gust of wind threatened to knock her off balance, Sarah wondered if pride was a luxury she could no longer afford. Not when she was carrying an innocent life that deserved better than her stubbornness. She was so lost in thought that she almost missed the shadow following her. Derek emerged from behind a concrete pillar like a nightmare taking shape. His tall frame cut through the snow with predatory grace, and his smile was sharp enough to draw blood. He wore an expensive coat she knew he could not afford, probably borrowed from whatever wealthy woman he was charming this month. "Sarah, sweetheart," he called, his voice carrying false warmth. "You look tired. This Independence Act is getting old, don't you think?" Her heart hammered against her ribs like a caged bird. She picked up her pace, but Derek matched it easily, his longer strides keeping him close enough to whisper poison in her ear. "You're embarrassing yourself," he continued, his tone shifting to the controlled menace she remembered too well. "A pregnant woman wandering the streets like a vagrant. What would your parents think?" Sarah's parents were dead, killed in a car accident 3 years ago, but Derek wielded their memory like a weapon. He knew exactly where to strike to cause maximum damage. The crowd on the street thinned as the weather worsened, and Sarah realized with growing panic that she was becoming isolated with her predator. Derek was herding her toward a quieter section of the street, away from witnesses and safety. That was when she saw him. A man stood outside the Four Seasons Hotel, tall and broad-shouldered, speaking intently into his phone. Everything about him radiated authority and control, from his perfectly tailored coat to the way he held himself with unconscious confidence. He looked like someone who had never known what it meant to be powerless. Without conscious thought, Sarah broke into a run. The man looked up, startled, as she threw herself against his chest and wrapped her arms around him like he was a life preserver in a storm. "Please," she whispered urgently, her voice trembling. "Just pretend you know me. Please." Marcus Sterling had been in the middle of closing a $50 million deal when the pregnant woman collided with his chest. His first instinct was to step back, to maintain the professional distance that had served him well in the cutthroat world of tech billionaires. But something in her voice, desperate and brave all at once, made him pause. She was beautiful in the way that broken things often are, with dark hair escaping from a messy bun and green eyes wide with fear. Her coat was too thin for the weather, and she was shaking. Though whether from cold or terror, he could not tell. Marcus had built his empire on reading people, on recognizing opportunity and threat in equal measure. The man approaching them radiated menace like heat from a furnace. Tall, conventionally handsome, with a kind of smile that never quite reached the eyes. This was Derek Walsh, and Marcus knew the type well. A predator in expensive clothing. "Who the hell are you?" Derek demanded, his voice carrying the authority of someone used to being obeyed. Marcus slipped his phone into his pocket with deliberate calm and wrapped his arm around Sarah's shoulders. The gesture felt natural, protective, right in a way that surprised him. "I'm her husband," Marcus said, his voice carrying the quiet authority of a man worth $3 billion. "Is there a problem here?" Sarah's sharp intake of breath told him she had not expected that particular lie, but she pressed closer to him, playing along with desperate hope. Derek's eyes narrowed as he studied Marcus, clearly trying to place him. Recognition dawned slowly, followed by calculation. Even Derek Walsh was not stupid enough to pick a fight with Marcus Sterling on a public street. "Husband?" Derek's laugh was ugly, bitter. "That's interesting, Sarah. When did you have time for a wedding between your eviction notices?" The cruelty in his voice made Marcus's jaw tighten. He had seen corporate sharks circle wounded prey, but this felt personal, vindictive in a way that spoke to deeper hurt. "Walk away," Marcus said quietly, but his tone carried the weight of boardroom battles in conquered markets. "Now!" Derek's hands clenched into fists, but he was smart enough to recognize when he was outmatched. The street was not entirely empty, and phones had cameras. A public altercation with Marcus Sterling would not serve his purposes. "This isn't over, Sarah," Derek said, his voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried more threat than shouting. "You know you need me. You always have." He melted back into the crowd like a shadow returning to darkness, but his presence lingered like smoke. Sarah sagged against Marcus, her bravado crumbling now that the immediate danger had passed. She looked up at him with a mixture of gratitude and mortification that made something twist in his chest. "Thank you," she whispered. "I'm sorry. I didn't know what else to do." Marcus studied her face, noting the exhaustion etched in the lines around her eyes, the way she unconsciously protected her pregnant belly. Something about her vulnerability called to a part of him he had thought long dead. "There's a coffee shop around the corner," he said. "You look like you could use somewhere warm to sit." Sarah hesitated, clearly torn between pride and desperation. "I can't pay you back for coffee." "I didn't ask you to." The simple statement hung between them like a bridge. Sarah looked back toward where Derek had disappeared, then at Marcus's face, searching for hidden motives and finding only genuine concern. "Okay," she said finally, "but just coffee, nothing else." Marcus smiled, the first real smile he had managed in months. Just coffee. As they walked toward the warmth and safety of the small cafe, neither of them noticed the photographer across the street already uploading images to social media. The caption read, "Billionaire Marcus Sterling's secret pregnant wife? Who is this mystery woman?" Within hours, Sarah's careful anonymity would be shattered, and the real battle would begin. The coffee shop was a haven of warmth and normalcy, filled with the scent of roasted beans and the gentle murmur of conversation. Sarah wrapped her hands around her mug of hot chocolate, savoring the heat that seeped through her frozen fingers. Across from her, Marcus Sterling sat with the kind of relaxed confidence that only came from never having to worry about the price of anything. "So," he said, stirring his black coffee with deliberate movements, "Derek Walsh." Sarah flinched at the name. "You know him." "I know the type. Corporate predator, probably failed entrepreneur, definitely someone who thinks the world owes him something." The accuracy of the assessment surprised her. He's my ex-husband. We divorced 8 months ago, before you were pregnant. It was not a question, but Sarah nodded anyway. He doesn't know about the baby. I found out after he left. Marcus leaned back in his chair, studying her with the intensity that had made him billions. What did you do before? I was a lawyer, corporate law. She laughed bitterly. Ironic, considering I'm the one being hunted now. What happened? Sarah hesitated. She had told this story so many times to potential employers, to friends who slowly stopped calling, to her reflection in the mirror when she could not sleep. Each telling made it feel more like a fairy tale, less like the choice that had destroyed her life. I discovered my firm was covering up environmental contamination that was making people sick, children sick. She met his eyes. I couldn't let it stand. So you blew the whistle and got disbarred for violating attorney-client privilege. Funny how doing the right thing can be wrong in the eyes of the law. Marcus nodded slowly. I know something about that choice, between profit and principle. There was something in his voice that made Sarah study his face more carefully. She had been so focused on her own desperation that she had not really looked at him. Now she saw the exhaustion around his eyes, the tension in his shoulders that spoke of battles fought on fronts she could not imagine. What do you do? She asked. I run a tech company, Sterling Dynamics. Sarah nearly choked on her hot chocolate. Sterling Dynamics was not just a tech company, it was the tech company, the one that had revolutionized cloud computing and made its founder one of the youngest billionaires in America. You're Marcus Sterling, she said, the words coming out strangled. Guilty. Oh, God. Sarah buried her face in her hands. I grabbed a billionaire. This is a disaster. Why is it a disaster? Because now it looks like I'm exactly what Derek says I am. A gold digger who throws herself at rich men. As if summoned by her words, Sarah's phone began buzzing with notifications. Text after text, call after call, the electronic chorus of a life imploding in real time. With shaking hands, she opened the first message from her friend Elena. Sarah, you need to see this. Now. The link led to a Twitter thread that was already going viral. Photos of her embracing Marcus outside the hotel, speculation about their relationship, and worst of all, a video Derek had posted within the last hour. In the video, Derek sat in what looked like an expensive apartment, his expression perfectly crafted to convey hurt and concern. I'm heartbroken to see these photos of my ex-wife, Sarah Mitchell, he said, his voice heavy with false emotion. She's 6 months pregnant with what I believe is my child, and instead of letting me help her, she's throwing herself at billionaire Marcus Sterling. I just want what's best for our baby. The comments were already pouring in, each one a knife in Sarah's chest. Gold digger. Poor guy dodged a bullet, using her pregnancy to trap a billionaire. Sarah's hands shook as she scrolled through the poison, each word confirming her worst fears about how the world would see her. Sarah. Marcus's voice cut through her spiral. Look at me. She lifted her eyes to find him watching her with an expression she could not read. This is not your fault, he said simply. Isn't it? I'm the one who grabbed you. I'm the one who... You're the one who was being stalked by a man who clearly has no intention of leaving you alone. You protected yourself the only way you could. His phone was buzzing too now, but he ignored it completely, his attention focused entirely on her. I have a proposition, Marcus said. Let me hire you. Hire me? As what? Legal consultant for my foundation. I've been looking for someone with your background, someone who understands the cost of doing the right thing. Sarah stared at him. You don't know anything about my legal skills? I could be terrible. You gave up everything to protect children you didn't know. That tells me everything I need to know about your character. The offer hung between them like a lifeline, beautiful and terrifying in equal measure. Sarah wanted to reach for it, to let someone else carry the weight of her survival for just a little while. But Derek's video played in her mind on repeat, his accusations echoing in the comment section of the internet. If she accepted Marcus's help now, she would be confirming every cruel assumption about her motives. I can't, she whispered. Everyone will think. Everyone already thinks, Marcus said gently. The question is whether you're going to let their assumptions dictate your choices. As Sarah struggled with the decision that would change everything, her phone rang. The caller ID made her blood run cold. Derek. Sarah stared at Derek's name on her phone screen as if it were a snake coiled to strike. Marcus reached across the small table and placed his hand over hers, steadying the trembling that had started in her fingers and was working its way through her entire body. "You don't have to answer," he said quietly. But Sarah knew Derek well enough to understand that ignoring him would only make him escalate. She had seen his fury when he felt dismissed, the cold calculation that followed when his initial attempts at control failed. She answered the call. "Hello, Derek." "Sweetheart." His voice was honey over broken glass, sweet and dangerous. "Congratulations on your new relationship. Very impressive work." Sarah closed her eyes, willing herself to stay calm. Across from her, Marcus watched with the intensity of a predator assessing a threat. "What do you want, Derek?" "I want to help you, Sarah. I always have. This little rebellion of yours has gone on long enough." "I'm not rebelling. I'm living my life." Derek's laugh was soft and terrible. "Living, is that what you call this? Waitressing for minimum wage while you're pregnant with my child? Throwing yourself at strangers for protection? The baby isn't—" "Of course it's mine, Sarah. We both know you're not the type to sleep around, despite what your new sugar daddy might think." The casual cruelty in his voice made Sarah's stomach clench. This was the Derek she remembered from their worst fights, the one who could find her deepest insecurities and weaponize them with surgical precision. "I saw your little performance online," Derek continued. "Very touching. But we both know how this ends. He'll get bored, probably sooner rather than later, and you'll come crawling back to me. Just like you always do." "I'm not coming back, Derek. Not ever." "We'll see." His voice shifted, becoming businesslike, in a way that was somehow more frightening than his anger. "I've been doing some research on your new friend, Marcus Sterling. Very impressive, very rich. Very much the type to have a reputation to protect." Sarah's blood chilled. "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about the fact that billionaires don't usually appreciate being associated with disgraced lawyers who steal from their clients." "I didn't steal." "Is that what you told him? That you were some kind of noble whistleblower?" Derek's laugh was poison. "Did you mention the part where you violated attorney-client privilege? Where you were disbarred for professional misconduct? Where you cost your firm $50 million in settlements?" Each word was a perfectly aimed arrow, striking at the shame Sarah carried about the choices that had led her here. She had told herself that exposing the contamination was worth the cost, but in the dark hours of sleepless nights, she wondered if there had been another way. Marcus was watching her face change, seeing the impact of Derek's psychological warfare in real time. His jaw tightened, and he held out his hand for the phone. Sarah shook her head. This was her battle to fight. "I'm going to give you 24 hours to think about this, Sarah," Derek continued. 24 hours to decide whether you want to keep playing house with your billionaire or come home where you belong. Because if you don't make the right choice, I'm going to make sure Mr. Sterling knows exactly what kind of woman he's protecting." The line went dead. Sarah set the phone down with hands that shook like autumn leaves. Around them, the coffee shop continued its normal rhythm, people living their lives unaware that hers was disintegrating in real time. "What did he tell you?" Marcus asked. Sarah looked at him. This man who had stepped into her nightmare without hesitation, who had offered her salvation when she had nothing to give in return. The knowledge that she was about to lose him made her chest ache with surprising intensity. "He's going to tell you about the disbarment," she said quietly, "about how I violated privilege, how I cost my firm millions. He's going to make sure you know exactly what kind of damaged goods you're dealing with." Marcus leaned back in his chair, processing this information with the clinical detachment that had made him successful. Sarah waited for the moment when his expression would change, when the protective warmth in his eyes would turn to disgust or calculation. Instead, he signaled the waitress for another coffee. "Tell me about the case," he said. Sarah blinked. "What?" "The environmental contamination. Tell me about it." For the next 30 minutes, Sarah found herself reliving the case that had destroyed her life. She told Marcus about the chemical plant that had been dumping toxins into the groundwater, about the cluster of childhood cancers in the surrounding community, about the corporate lawyers who had buried the evidence and threatened the families into silence. She told him about the impossible choice between her oath to her clients and her obligation to the truth, about the moment she realized that children were dying while she filed paperwork and collected billable hours. Marcus listened without interruption, his dark eyes never leaving her face. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. You saved lives, he said finally. I destroyed my career. You saved lives, he repeated more firmly. Children are alive today because you chose conscience over comfort. That makes you exactly the kind of person I want working for me. Sarah felt tears threatening and blinked them back. Derek will try to destroy you too. Marcus smiled, and for the first time since she had known him, it was not entirely pleasant. Let him try. As if triggered by his words, both their phones began buzzing simultaneously. The viral storm that had started with Derek's video was about to become a hurricane, and Sarah was about to learn that sometimes being saved came with a price she had never expected to pay. The Sterling Foundation offices occupied 3 floors of a gleaming downtown Chicago tower, all glass and steel, and the kind of minimalist aesthetic that whispered serious money. Sarah felt like an imposter walking through the halls in her discount store clothing, but Marcus seemed oblivious to the stares from his impeccably dressed employees. This will be your office, he said, opening the door to a space larger than her entire apartment. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a view of Lake Michigan that probably cost more per square foot than most people made in a year. Sarah stood frozen in the doorway. Marcus, this is too much. It's what the position requires. You'll be reviewing all our grant applications, ensuring our funding goes to legitimate causes. After what happened to you, I figure you have a good eye for corporate malfeasance. The work he described was real, meaningful, exactly the kind of legal challenge that had drawn her to law in the first place. But guilt gnawed at her stomach like acid. People are going to say you're paying me because we're sleeping together. Marcus turned from the window, his expression serious. Are we sleeping together? No. Then people will be wrong. People are wrong about a lot of things, Sarah. You can't live your life managing their misconceptions. But even as he spoke, Sarah could see the cost of his protection playing out on his phone. The entertainment blogs had picked up Derek's video, spinning it into a soap opera of billionaire romance and pregnant gold diggers. Marcus Sterling's stock price had actually gone up, because apparently the market found his alleged love life entertaining. Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from Elena. Girl, you need to see what Derek is posting now. This time Derek had shared what looked like old photos from their marriage, images of them looking happy at charity events and corporate functions. The caption read, Sarah always loved the finer things in life. I guess I just couldn't provide enough for her tastes. The comments were brutal. She probably planned this whole thing. Feels sorry for the billionaire. Once a gold digger, always a gold digger. Stop reading that poison, Marcus said, plucking the phone from her hands. How did you know? Because you look like you're going to be sick, and we both know what Derek is doing. Sarah sank into the expensive office chair that was now supposedly hers. He's destroying my reputation to force me back to him. It's psychological warfare. And we fight back. How? By making me your actual girlfriend? That'll really help the gold digger narrative. Marcus was quiet for a moment, studying her with that intense focus that made her feel like he could see through to her soul. There is another option, he said carefully. What? We could make it real. Sarah's heart stopped. What are you talking about? Marriage, a real marriage, not just for show. It would give you legal protection, financial security, and it would shut down Derek's narrative. The suggestion hung between them like a live wire, dangerous and electric. Sarah stared at him, searching for signs that this was some kind of elaborate joke. You don't know me, she whispered. I know you gave up everything to protect children. I know you'd rather work minimum wage than compromise your principles. I know you're brave enough to grab a stranger when you're cornered. His voice was steady, matter of fact. I know that's more than most marriages start with. And what would you get out of this arrangement? Marcus was quiet for so long that Sarah thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was softer than she had ever heard it. I've spent 10 years building my company, making money, winning deals. I'm good at it, but it's empty. You remind me that there are things worth more than profit margins. Before Sarah could respond, the office door burst open. A woman in her 60s swept in like an avenging angel, her silver hair perfectly styled and her Chanel suit worth more than Sarah's yearly income. The family resemblance was unmistakable. Marcus! The woman's voice could have frozen the lake outside. We need to talk. Mother, I'd like you to meet Sarah Mitchell. Sarah, this is Victoria Sterling. Victoria's gaze raked over Sarah like a searchlight, cataloging every flaw and imperfection. When her eyes landed on Sarah's pregnant belly, her expression hardened to diamond. Miss Mitchell, how delightful to finally meet the woman who's been all over the news with my son. The words were polite, but the tone carried enough frost to cause hypothermia. Sarah found herself standing straighter, drawing on reserves of dignity she had not known she possessed. Mrs. Sterling, your son has been very kind to me. I'm sure he has. Marcus has always had a soft spot for strays. The insult hung in the air like a slap. Marcus stepped forward, his expression dangerous. Mother, I think Miss Mitchell and I should have a private conversation, Victoria continued smoothly. Perhaps you could give us a moment, darling? It was phrased as a request, but Sarah recognized a command when she heard one. She also recognized the look in Victoria Sterling's eyes. This woman had not built a fortune by being gentle with obstacles. Marcus looked between them, clearly torn. Sarah, you don't have to. It's fine, Sarah said, surprised by the steadiness in her own voice. I think your mother and I understand each other perfectly. As soon as Marcus left, Victoria's mask dropped completely. What remained was pure predator, beautiful and terrifying in equal measure. Let's dispense with pleasantries, Victoria said, moving to the window. What's your price? Excuse me? Your price. For disappearing from my son's life. Everyone has one. Sarah felt something hot and angry unfurl in her chest. You think I'm here for money? I think you're a disgraced lawyer who saw an opportunity and took it. I think you're clever enough to know this fairy tale has an expiration date. Victoria turned, her smile sharp as a blade. The question is whether you're smart enough to cash out before you get hurt. And if I say no, then I'll destroy you so thoroughly that Derek Walsh will look like a minor annoyance. Victoria's voice remained pleasant, conversational. I'll ensure that every law firm in the country knows exactly why you were disbarred. I'll make sure the details of your environmental case become public knowledge, including the families who suffered because of your delay in coming forward. I'll turn your moment of conscience into a cautionary tale about lawyers who think they're above the law. Sarah felt the blood drain from her face. The families Derek had threatened to expose were real people with real pain, and she had agonized over the months it had taken her to build a case strong enough to ensure justice. You would hurt innocent people to get rid of me? I would protect my family. Victoria's expression softened fractionally, but her eyes remained ice cold. I'm not a monster, Miss Mitchell. I'm a mother, and you represent a threat to everything I built. I don't want his money. Perhaps not. But you want his protection, his stability, his ability to solve your problems? That's not love, dear. That's convenience with better packaging. Victoria moved to the door, then paused with her hand on the handle. I'm offering you $5 million to disappear. More money than you could spend in a lifetime, enough to raise your child anywhere in the world. Take it, and this ends quietly. Refuse, and I'll make sure the rest of your life is a cautionary tale. As the door closed behind Victoria Sterling, Sarah sank into her chair and finally allowed herself to cry. Because she was beginning to understand that Derek had been the least of her problems, and the price of being saved by a billionaire might be higher than she could afford to pay. Sarah spent 3 sleepless nights in the small apartment Marcus had arranged for her, staring at the ceiling and replaying Victoria Sterling's threat on an endless loop. $5 million. More money than she had ever imagined having. Enough to disappear and start over somewhere, Derek would never find her. The rational part of her mind whispered that Victoria was right. Whatever she felt for Marcus was gratitude dressed up as attraction, the desperate emotional attachment of a drowning woman to her rescuer. She had no business playing in the Sterling family's league, but when she closed her eyes, she remembered the way Marcus had looked at her in the coffee shop, the genuine respect in his voice when he talked about her case. She remembered his offer of marriage, delivered with the kind of matter-of-fact certainty that suggested he had thought it through completely. On the 4th morning, Elena arrived with coffee and the kind of hard truths that only best friends could deliver. You look terrible, Lena said, settling into the expensive furniture that still felt foreign in Sarah's life. Thank you. Very comforting. I'm not here to comfort you. I'm here to tell you to stop being an idiot. Sarah raised an eyebrow. Elena Rodriguez had been her anchor through law school, the divorce, and every crisis since. If anyone had earned the right to call her an idiot, it was Elena. Derek posted another video yesterday, Elena continued. This time he's claiming you had an affair during your marriage. Says that's why he left, says he has proof. Sarah's stomach dropped. That's a lie. I know it's a lie. You know it's a lie. But the internet doesn't know it's a lie, and Derek is very good at making lies sound like truth. So I should take Victoria's money and run. I didn't say that. Elena leaned forward, her dark eyes intense. I said stop being an idiot about the wrong things. You're so worried about what people think that you're missing what's actually happening here. Which is, Marcus Sterling is in love with you. Sarah laughed, but it came out hollow. He barely knows me. He knows enough. And more importantly, you're in love with him. The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. She had been so focused on survival, on protecting herself from Derek and Victoria and the cruel judgment of strangers, that she had not allowed herself to examine the feeling that bloomed in her chest every time Marcus walked into a room. It doesn't matter, she whispered. His mother will destroy me if I stay. Then fight back. With what? I have nothing, Elena. No money, no reputation, no family. Victoria Sterling could buy and sell me 1,000 times over. Elena was quiet for a long moment, studying Sarah's face with the intensity of someone trying to solve a puzzle. You know what your problem is, she said finally. You think being right is enough. You think that because you know the truth will win. Shouldn't it? Should and will are different things. Derek is winning because he's fighting a war, and you're trying to maintain moral superiority. Victoria is winning because she understands power, and you're still playing by rules that don't exist. Sarah felt something shift inside her chest, a spark of the fire that had driven her to blow the whistle on the contamination case. What are you saying? I'm saying stop being a victim and start being a lawyer again. You took down a $50 million corporation with nothing but your conscience and a filing cabinet. Derek Walsh and Victoria Sterling are not smarter than you. That afternoon, Sarah made a decision that would change everything. She called Marcus and asked him to meet her at the coffee shop where this all began. When he arrived, she was waiting with a manila folder and an expression he had not seen before. I've been thinking about your offer, she said without preamble. Marcus slid into the chair across from her, his dark eyes searching her face. And? I want to make a counter-proposal. Wait. She opened the folder and spread its contents across the small table. Bank records, corporate filings, photographs, emails. The detritus of a relationship built on lies and sustained by manipulation. Derek has been living off wealthy women for the past 2 years, Sarah said, her voice steady and professional. First Amanda Chen, then Victoria Morrison, now someone named Bethany Walsh. He moves from city to city, finds lonely women with money, and bleeds them dry before moving on. Marcus studied the documents with the intensity of a man who had built empires on information. How did you get all this? I remembered how to be a lawyer. Sarah's smile was sharp as winter. Elena has a friend who works in private investigation. Turns out Derek left quite a trail once you know where to look. This is enough to destroy him. It's enough to neutralize him. But that's not what I want to talk about. Sarah pulled out a single sheet of paper, a prenuptial agreement she had drafted in careful legal language. If you're serious about marriage, she said, these are my terms. Marcus read the document in silence, his expression growing more intrigued with each line. The agreement was unlike anything he had ever seen. Instead of protecting assets, it outlined a partnership. Instead of division of property, it created shared responsibility for the Sterling Foundation. Instead of traditional spousal support, it established Sarah's role as an equal partner in all philanthropic decisions. You're asking for control of my foundation, he said finally. I'm asking for partnership. Real partnership, not just pretty window dressing. And if I say no, Sarah met his eyes without flinching, then I thank you for your help, accept your mother's money, and disappear. You go back to your empty corporate victories, and Derek moves on to his next victim. Marcus was quiet for a long time, reading and rereading the agreement. When he finally looked up, his expression was unreadable. You realize this makes you one of the most powerful women in Chicago philanthropy. I realize it makes me your equal partner in changing the world. And you think you can handle that responsibility? Sarah thought of the children whose lives she had saved by sacrificing her career, of the families Derek had hurt in his pursuit of easy money, of the woman she had been before fear made her small. I think I was born for it. Marcus Sterling had not become a billionaire by making impulsive decisions. But as he looked at Sarah Mitchell, seeing past the fear and desperation to the steel beneath, he found himself reaching for a pen. "Partners," he said, and signed his name with a flourish. Neither of them noticed Derek Walsh sitting in a car across the street, his face twisted with rage as he watched his carefully constructed plans crumble. Neither of them saw him make a phone call that would set in motion the most dangerous phase of their battle. Because Derek had decided that if he could not have Sarah, no one could. The courthouse wedding was deliberately modest, a stark contrast to the media circus that had surrounded Sarah and Marcus for weeks. Only Elena served as witness, her presence a reminder that some bonds transcended money and scandal. Sarah wore a simple blue dress that accommodated her growing belly, and Marcus had chosen a charcoal suit instead of his usual black. But modest did not mean invisible. Photographers waited outside the courthouse, and within minutes of their emergence as husband and wife, the images were racing across the internet. Derek's response was swift and vicious. The video he posted that afternoon showed him in what appeared to be a lawyer's office, his expression a masterpiece of wounded dignity and righteous anger. "I'm heartbroken to announce that my ex-wife Sarah Mitchell has married billionaire Marcus Sterling," he said, his voice heavy with false emotion. "What makes this particularly painful is that Sarah is carrying my child, and she's denied me any contact with my own baby." The lie was breathtaking in its audacity. Derek had never wanted the baby, had never even acknowledged the pregnancy, but he delivered the falsehood with such conviction that even Sarah found herself doubting her own memories. "I'm not doing this for money or revenge," Derek continued. "I'm doing this because every child deserves to know their father. I'm filing for paternal rights, and I hope the court will see through this obvious attempt to buy a family." The comments that followed were nuclear in their toxicity. "Gold digger gets her billionaire. Poor guy doesn't even know it's not his kid. She's using an innocent baby as a meal ticket." Sarah read them until Marcus physically took the phone from her hands. "Stop," he said firmly. "We knew this was coming." They were in his Hamptons house now, a sprawling estate that felt more like a fortress than a home. Sarah had insisted on the isolation, wanting space to think without the constant pressure of cameras and social media. "He's claiming paternal rights," she said, her voice hollow. "Even if we prove he's lying about wanting the baby, he can still demand visitation, custody battles. He can make our lives hell for years." Marcus poured himself a scotch and offered her sparkling water with lime. The gesture was thoughtful, domestic in a way that made her chest ache with unexpected tenderness. "Let him try," Marcus said. "We have the resources to fight him." "You have the resources. I'm just along for the ride." "Sarah." Marcus set down his glass and moved to the couch where she sat, her hands protectively covering her belly. "Look at me." When she met his eyes, he took her hands in his grip warm and steady. "You are my wife, my partner, my equal in every way that matters. Derek can try to reduce you to a gold digger, but we both know what you really are." "What am I?" "You're the woman who gave up everything to protect strangers. You're the woman who chose principle over comfort, truth over safety. You're the woman I married because I couldn't imagine facing the future without you." The words were simple, matter of fact, but they hit Sarah like a revelation. In all the chaos of Derek's attacks and Victoria's threats, she had forgotten that beneath the headlines and the drama, she had married a man she was falling in love with. "I'm scared," she whispered. "Good. Fear means you understand the stakes." Marcus leaned forward, his forehead touching hers in a gesture of intimacy that felt more profound than any passionate kiss. "We're going to win, Sarah. Not because we have more money or better lawyers, but because we're fighting for something real. Derek is fighting to possess you. We're fighting to build something together." That night, Sarah allowed herself to believe him. She fell asleep in Marcus's arms. feeling safe for the first time in months. She woke to the sound of breaking glass. Derek had found them. He stood in the living room of the Hamptons' house like an avenging angel, his clothes torn and his eyes wild with the kind of rage that came from watching everything you wanted slip through your fingers. "Did you really think you could hide from me?" he snarled, advancing on Sarah as she pressed herself against the headboard. Marcus was already moving, placing himself between Derek and the bed, his body taut with controlled violence. "You're trespassing," Marcus said, his voice deadly calm. "Leave now, or I'll have you arrested." Derek laughed, the sound unhinged and terrible. "Arrested for visiting my pregnant wife?" "Ex-wife," Sarah said, finding her voice. "And the baby isn't yours." "Of course it's mine." Derek's gaze fixed on her belly with possessive hunger. "You think I don't know you, Sarah? You think I don't know you've never been with anyone but me?" The truth in his words made Sarah's stomach clench. She had been faithful during their marriage, and in the months since the divorce, she had been too broken to even consider dating. "It doesn't matter," Marcus said, stepping closer to Derek. "The baby will be mine legally. I'll adopt him or her, and you'll have no claim." "We'll see about that." Derek pulled out his phone, and Sarah realized with growing horror that he was recording. "I want the whole world to see this. The billionaire who stole my family, threatening me in my own wife's bedroom." The phone camera captured Marcus's face, his expression dark with protective fury. It captured Sarah in bed, obviously pregnant, obviously afraid. Most damaging of all, it captured the obvious intimacy of the scene, the rumpled sheets and casual clothing that suggested they had been sleeping together. "Perfect," Derek murmured, already uploading the video. "Let's see how your corporate board feels about their CEO breaking into pregnant women's bedrooms." Sarah realized with growing horror that Derek had turned their private moment into pornographic evidence of his narrative. The video would look like exactly what he claimed, a wealthy man asserting ownership over a pregnant woman, while her ex-husband tried desperately to protect his child. "Get out," Marcus said, his voice barely controlled. Derek smiled, the expression sharp enough to draw blood. "I'm just getting started." As he disappeared into the night, Sarah understood that the real war was just beginning. And this time, Derek was playing for keeps. The video Derek uploaded from the Hamptons house went viral within hours, but not in the way Sarah expected. Instead of condemning Marcus, the internet seemed to rally around what they saw as a dramatic love story under siege. Protect Sarah began trending, with thousands of users sharing their own stories of abusive exes and toxic relationships. Women's rights groups picked up the story, framing it as a case study in how manipulative men use children as weapons. But Derek was not finished. 3 days after the break-in, Sarah received a call that made her blood run cold. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, her obstetrician, sounded shaken and apologetic. "Sarah, I'm so sorry, but I have to ask, are you taking any medications that weren't prescribed by me?" "What?" "No, of course not. Why?" "Your latest blood work shows traces of a sedative. It's not dangerous to you or the baby at these levels, but it's concerning. I need to know if you've been taking anything, even over-the-counter sleep aids." Sarah's hands began to shake. She had been feeling unusually tired lately, struggling to stay awake during meetings at the foundation. She had attributed it to pregnancy and stress, but now a darker possibility crept into her mind. "Dr. Walsh, could someone have been giving me something without my knowledge?" The silence on the other end of the line was answer enough. That evening, Sarah sat in Marcus's home office while he worked with a security consultant to sweep the house for surveillance devices. They found 3 hidden cameras and 2 audio bugs, all professionally installed and all capable of broadcasting to Derek's phone. "He's been watching us," Sarah said, her voice hollow. "For weeks, maybe months." Marcus's jaw was tight with controlled fury. "The sedatives?" "Probably in my food or drinks when I wasn't looking. Just enough to make me sluggish, compliant." The violation was breathtaking in its intimacy. Derek had been inside their private moments, watching them sleep, recording their conversations, drugging Sarah slowly and carefully to make her more manageable. But the worst was yet to come. The next morning, Derek held a press conference outside the courthouse where he was filing for emergency custody. He stood beside a woman Sarah recognized from his social media history, Bethany Walsh, his current girlfriend and financial support system. I've discovered that my ex-wife is being held against her will by Marcus Sterling, Derek announced to the gathered cameras. She's being drugged and isolated from her friends and family. I have video evidence of her being held in a bedroom against her will. He played edited clips from the Hamptons house footage, carefully cut to remove context and make Marcus look like a kidnapper. Sarah's voice saying "I'm scared" was isolated and amplified. Marcus's protective stance was reframed as threatening. Sarah is a victim, Derek continued, his voice heavy with false compassion. She's been brainwashed by a man who sees her as a possession. I'm asking the court to order a welfare check and to grant me emergency custody of my unborn child. The narrative was brilliant in its simplicity and devastating in its implications. Derek had turned Sarah's rescue into evidence of her victimization, her marriage into proof of her coercion. Within hours, protesters gathered outside Sterling Dynamics headquarters. Some supported Sarah, carrying signs that read, "Believe women" and "Derek is a liar." Others demanded Marcus's arrest, convinced by Derek's performance that they were witnessing a high-profile kidnapping. The Sterling Dynamics board called an emergency meeting. Marcus stood before 12 of the most powerful people in corporate America, his usual confidence replaced by grim determination. Sarah sat beside him, her hands folded over her belly, trying to project strength she did not feel. "This is a disaster," said board member Patricia Hawthorne, her voice sharp with accusation. "Our stock price has dropped 15% in 2 days. The SEC is asking questions about your personal life," added James Morrison. "They want to know if you've been using company resources to silence Sarah's ex-husband." "Have you?" asked another board member. Marcus's answer was steady, uncompromising. "I've used personal resources to protect my wife from a stalker. If you have a problem with that, I'll buy out your shares and find new board members." The threat landed like a bomb. Marcus owned controlling interest in Sterling Dynamics, but his board relationships were crucial to the company's reputation and functionality. "Marcus," Patricia said more gently, "we're not questioning your character, but this situation is becoming untenable. Perhaps it would be better if Sarah stepped away from public view until after the baby is born." Sarah felt the familiar weight of being discussed rather than included, treated as a problem to be managed rather than a person with agency. "No," she said quietly. The room turned to her in surprise. Sarah had been silent through most of the meeting, deferring to Marcus and the lawyers, but something in Patricia's suggestion had triggered the lawyer she used to be. "I said no." Sarah stood, her voice growing stronger. "I will not hide. I will not disappear. And I will not let Derek Walsh turn my life into a cautionary tale about women who dare to choose their own futures." She looked around the room, meeting each board member's eyes in turn. "You're worried about stock prices and SEC investigations. I understand that. But what you should be worried about is setting a precedent that says powerful men can be blackmailed by vindictive exes with good lawyers and better publicity strategies." "Ms. Mitchell," James Morrison began. "Mrs. Sterling," Sarah corrected sharply, "and I'm not finished." She moved to the presentation screen, pulling up her phone and connecting it to the display. The documents she had compiled about Derek's pattern of financial abuse filled the room. "This is who you're being threatened by," she said. "A con artist who has systematically destroyed women's lives for his own benefit. If we give in to his demands, if we validate his narrative, we're not just hurting me. We're hurting every woman who's ever been stalked, manipulated, or abused by a man who thinks he owns her." The room was silent as board members absorbed the evidence of Derek's true nature. "The question," Sarah continued, "is whether Sterling Dynamics stands for innovation and integrity, or whether you're willing to sacrifice both to appease a bully." Marcus watched his wife command the room with something approaching awe. This was the woman who had given up everything to protect strangers, the lawyer who had taken on a $50 million corporation with nothing but conviction. But as Sarah finished her presentation, none of them realized that Derek was already planning his most devastating attack yet. One that would push Sarah to the breaking point and force her to choose between the life she had built and the child she carried. The attack came at dawn, swift and coordinated and devastating in its precision. Sarah woke to the sound of Marcus shouting into his phone, his voice tight with controlled panic. "What do you mean, frozen?" he was saying. "Every account? That's impossible." Sarah struggled to consciousness, pregnancy brain making her thoughts sluggish. The sedatives Derek had been feeding her were out of her system now, but weeks of chemical manipulation had left her feeling disconnected from her own body. "Marcus," she called. "What's happening?" He turned to her, his face grim. "Someone has filed emergency injunctions freezing all Sterling Dynamics assets. They're claiming money laundering, corporate fraud, tax evasion." Sarah's blood chilled. "Derek, it has to be, but I don't know how he managed this level of coordination." The answer came an hour later, delivered by a federal marshal who served them with subpoenas at their breakfast table. The documents were signed by Judge Patricia Morrison, James Morrison's wife, and a sitting federal judge with a reputation for aggressive interpretation of financial crimes. The conflict of interest was staggering, but legally irrelevant. Judge Morrison had recused herself from any Sterling Dynamics cases, but this was technically a criminal investigation triggered by an anonymous tip about suspicious financial transactions. "They're freezing everything," Marcus's lawyer explained over an emergency conference call. "Personal accounts, corporate assets, even the foundation funds. Until the investigation is complete, you have no access to liquid capital." Sarah understood the trap immediately. Without money, they could not fight Derek's custody challenge. Without resources, Marcus could not protect her from the media circus that was already gathering outside their building. Derek had not just attacked their finances. He had attacked their ability to defend themselves. The second wave came that afternoon. A team of Child Protective Services investigators arrived with a court order to evaluate Sarah's living situation and mental state. "We've received reports that you're being held against your will," the lead investigator, a tired-looking woman named Carol Stevens, explained. "We need to conduct interviews to ensure your safety and the safety of your unborn child." Sarah sat in her own living room, answering questions about her marriage, her mental health, her relationship with Derek. Every answer was recorded, every gesture analyzed for signs of coercion or Stockholm Syndrome. "Do you feel free to leave this relationship?" Carol asked. "Of course I do. But you understand that Mr. Sterling has significant financial resources that might make leaving difficult?" The question was a trap. If Sarah said yes, it implied she was staying for money. If she said no, it suggested she was naive about her situation. "I stay because I love my husband," Sarah said simply. Carol made a note. "And the allegations of drug use?" "Someone was drugging me without my knowledge. We have medical evidence." "But you can't prove who was responsible." Another trap. The medical evidence showed sedatives in Sarah's system, but without video footage of Derek actually administering the drugs, it was circumstantial. The interview continued for 3 hours, each question designed to undermine Sarah's credibility and autonomy. By the end, she felt hollowed out, reduced to a collection of symptoms and red flags. The final blow came that evening. Elena arrived at the house with tears in her eyes and a tablet full of news stories. "Sarah, you need to see this." The headline read, "Billionaire's pregnant wife hospitalized following overdose." The story, sourced to medical professionals familiar with the case, described Sarah as a troubled woman with a history of prescription drug abuse who had been found unconscious in Marcus Sterling's home. Every detail was wrong, but the lies were crafted with surgical precision. Sarah's legitimate medical treatment was reframed as addiction. Her pregnancy was described as high risk due to maternal substance abuse. Marcus was portrayed as an enabler, a wealthy man too naive to recognize his wife's problems. "Who would leak this?" Sarah whispered. Elena's expression was grim. "Someone with access to medical records. Someone who knows the system well enough to make lies sound like facts." The implication was clear. Derek had found allies in positions of authority, people willing to abuse their access to destroy Sarah's reputation. That night, Sarah sat in the bathroom with a pregnancy test she did not need, staring at the positive result that confirmed what she already knew. 7 months pregnant, facing custody battles and criminal investigations, and a media circus that painted her as an unstable drug addict. She thought about Victoria Sterling's offer, $5 million and a chance to disappear, to raise her child somewhere Derek could never find them. For the first time since this nightmare began, the offer seemed reasonable. Marcus found her there an hour later, still holding the test, tears streaming down her face. "I can't do this," she whispered. "I can't bring a child into this chaos." Marcus knelt beside her, his hands gentle as he took the test and set it aside. Yes, you can. How? They've destroyed everything. Our money, our reputation, our privacy. What kind of life can we give a baby? The kind of life that matters. The kind where love is more important than money, where truth eventually wins over lies. Sarah looked at him, this man who had given up his fortune to protect her, who had chosen love over legacy. What if we lose? Then we lose together, and we rebuild together. As Sarah leaned into her husband's embrace, neither of them knew that Derek Walsh was about to make his final, most desperate play, one that would force them to risk everything they had left to save their unborn child. But they were also about to discover that sometimes the greatest victories come not from being stronger than your enemies, but from being more willing to sacrifice for what matters most. The courtroom was packed beyond capacity, a circus of media attention that turned Sarah's custody hearing into a national spectacle. Judge Patricia Morrison presided with the cold efficiency of someone determined to appear impartial despite her obvious conflicts of interest. Derek sat at the plaintiff's table with his team of expensive lawyers, his expression a masterpiece of wounded fatherhood. Bethany Walsh sat behind him, playing the role of supportive girlfriend to perfection. Sarah and Marcus occupied the defendant's table with a single attorney, Harold Chen, a public defender who had volunteered his services when Sterling Dynamics assets remained frozen. The asymmetry was deliberate and devastating. Derek had unlimited resources while Sarah appeared to be represented by legal aid. Your Honor, Derek's lead attorney began, we're here today because a child's welfare is at stake. Mr. Walsh has been denied access to his unborn child by a billionaire who has systematically isolated and controlled Ms. Mitchell. The opening statements painted Sarah as a victim of sophisticated psychological manipulation, a woman too broken to recognize her own captivity. Marcus was portrayed as a predator who used his wealth to purchase compliance from vulnerable women. When it was Harold Chen's turn to respond, he stood slowly, his worn suit a stark contrast to the designer clothing surrounding him. Your Honor, this case is not about child welfare. It's about power. Specifically, it's about a man who cannot accept that his ex-wife has chosen a life without him. Chen activated a laptop, and the courtroom screens filled with evidence Sarah had compiled over months of investigation. Bank records showing Derek's pattern of financial abuse. Screenshots of social media posts revealing his manipulative tactics. Medical records proving the systematic drugging Sarah had endured. The plaintiff wants you to believe that Sarah Mitchell is a victim, Chen continued. He's right. She is a victim, but not of Marcus Sterling. She's a victim of Derek Walsh's systematic campaign of psychological terrorism. The evidence was damning, comprehensive, and utterly convincing, but Derek's team was prepared. Objection, Your Honor, Derek's lawyer called. This evidence was obtained through illegal surveillance of our client. Judge Morrison's expression did not change. Sustained. The jury will disregard the previous exhibits. Sarah felt her heart sink. The judge was actively sabotaging their defense, using technicalities to exclude evidence while allowing Derek's fabrications to stand unchallenged. The pattern continued throughout the morning. Every piece of evidence that favored Sarah was ruled inadmissible. Every allegation Derek made was allowed to stand without corroboration. During the lunch recess, Sarah sat in the courthouse bathroom, fighting the panic that threatened to overwhelm her. Elena found her there, along with something unexpected. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, her obstetrician. Sarah, Dr. Walsh said, I've been following this case, and there's something you need to know. She handed Sarah a manila folder filled with medical records and laboratory reports. The blood work Derek's team is using to prove your drug addiction? It's been falsified. These are the real results from the same dates. Sarah stared at the documents, understanding dawning like sunrise. Someone at the lab has been changing my results. More than that, Dr. Walsh continued, I've been in touch with other doctors who've treated Derek's previous girlfriends. There's a pattern of medical manipulation, falsified records, systematic gaslighting using healthcare as a weapon. Elena's eyes were bright with vindication. We have him, Sarah. This proves everything. But when they returned to the courtroom, Judge Morrison refused to admit the new evidence, claiming it violated discovery deadlines and chain of custody requirements. Sarah watched her last hope die in a maze of legal technicalities, and she understood that Derek had not just corrupted the system, he had purchased it outright. That was when Marcus Sterling stood up and did something unprecedented in American legal history. "Your Honor," he said, his voice carrying across the packed courtroom, "I'd like to make a statement. Mr. Sterling, you're not scheduled to testify." "I'm not testifying, I'm confessing." The courtroom erupted in whispers and camera clicks. Derek's expression shifted from confidence to confusion to growing alarm. Marcus waited for silence, then began to speak in the calm, measured tone that had commanded boardrooms and congressional hearings. "6 months ago, I met Sarah Mitchell when she was running from a man who had systematically destroyed her life. I helped her because helping people is what decent human beings do. But over the past months, I've discovered something that changes everything." He paused, his eyes finding Sarah's across the courtroom. "I've discovered that sometimes the greatest victory is not winning. Sometimes the greatest victory is refusing to play a rigged game." Marcus reached into his jacket and pulled out a single sheet of paper. "Your Honor, I'm hereby renouncing all claims to Sterling Dynamics, my personal fortune, and any assets that might be used to influence this proceeding. I'm transferring everything to an irrevocable trust administered by the Chicago Community Foundation." The courtroom exploded. Derek's lawyers were on their feet, objecting to something that had no legal precedent. Judge Morrison was shouting for order, her carefully constructed plan crumbling in real time. But Marcus was not finished. "I'm also announcing my intention to disappear from public life permanently. Sarah and I will be leaving the country today, and we will not be returning. If Mr. Walsh wants to pursue custody of a child who is not biologically his, he's welcome to hire international private investigators to find us." Sarah stared at her husband in shock, understanding flooding through her like electric current. Marcus was not just protecting her, he was freeing her. By removing his wealth from the equation, he had destroyed Derek's entire narrative and eliminated the power dynamic that made their relationship questionable. Derek jumped to his feet, his composure finally cracking. "You can't do this. That's my child." "Prove it," Marcus said calmly. "Without access to my resources, without the ability to manipulate medical records, without a complicit judge, prove that you have any biological connection to Sarah's baby." The silence that followed was deafening. Because Derek could not prove what was not true, and everyone in the courtroom knew it. Judge Morrison tried to restore order, but it was too late. The media had their story, and it was not the one Derek had planned. Marcus Sterling had chosen love over billions of dollars, and Sarah Mitchell had been vindicated in the most public way possible. As courthouse security struggled to contain the chaos, Marcus took Sarah's hand and led her toward the exit. Reporters shouted questions, cameras flashed, but for the first time in months, Sarah was not running from the attention. She was walking toward freedom. 3 hours later, they were on a private jet to a country with no extradition treaty and no interest in American custody disputes. Sarah's contractions had started during the takeoff, and by the time they landed, she was in active labor. Their daughter was born in a small coastal hospital surrounded by strangers who knew nothing about billionaires or custody battles or viral videos. She was perfect and tiny and completely oblivious to the chaos that had preceded her arrival. Marcus held his daughter while Sarah slept, and for the first time in his adult life, he felt genuinely wealthy. Back in Chicago, Derek Walsh faced federal charges for medical fraud, perjury, and witness tampering. Victoria Sterling was investigated for judicial corruption. Judge Morrison was removed from the bench. The internet, which had been so quick to judge Sarah, was equally quick to celebrate her vindication. Sarah One became a rallying cry for women facing similar battles. But Sarah was not paying attention to hashtags or headlines. She was learning to be a mother, discovering that the greatest love story was not between her and Marcus, but between both of them and the small person who had made their sacrifice worthwhile. 6 months later, in a beach house on the Mediterranean coast, Sarah sat writing the final chapter of her memoir. Marcus worked in their garden while their daughter napped in the sunshine. They had lost billions of dollars, given up corporate empires, and abandoned the country of their birth. But they had won something far more valuable, the right to define their own story, and sometimes that was worth more than all the money in the world. Sarah closed her laptop and walked to the window, watching Marcus play with their daughter in the garden they had built together. This was not the ending she had imagined when she first grabbed a stranger on a snowy Chicago street. It was better, Because the best love stories were not about being saved by billionaires. They were about two people choosing to save each other, over and over again, until saving became as natural as breathing. Outside, the Mediterranean sun set over the life they had built from the ashes of everything they had lost. And Sarah understood, finally, that sometimes you had to lose everything to discover what was worth keeping. Their daughter laughed, the sound carrying on the evening breeze like a promise that some things were too precious to be bought, sold, or stolen. Some things could only be chosen, and they had chosen well. If Sarah's story resonated with you, if it reminded you that courage isn't the absence of fear, but the decision that something else matters more than being afraid, then I hope you'll share this message with someone who might need to hear it. Every like, every comment, every share helps stories like this reach women who are fighting their own battles against manipulation and control. Your engagement literally saves lives by showing survivors that they're not alone and that their stories matter. Hit that subscribe button if you believe in the power of storytelling to change hearts and minds. Turn on notifications because next week, I'll be sharing another incredible story of resilience and redemption that you won't want to miss. And in the comments below, tell me, what would you have done in Sarah's situation? Would you have taken Victoria Sterling's $5 million and disappeared? Or would you have fought back like Sarah did? I read every single comment, and your perspectives help shape the stories I choose to tell. Remember, every story of survival starts with someone brave enough to refuse to give up. Maybe that someone is you. Maybe that someone is in your life right now, waiting for a sign that they're not alone. Share this story. Start that conversation. Be the reason someone else finds the courage to write their own ending. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you in the next story.